Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Jacobs from SDIR. I'll be hosting today's webinar presentation from Tim Hosking, the country manager for Brazil at Aguia Resources, on the recent activity at the Tres Estradas phosphate project and development strategy for the group's Brazil-based phosphate portfolio. After the presentation, we'll commence a Q&A. That'll comprise both written submissions and some live questions from the floor. A copy of the webinar will also be available on Aguia's media channels later today, and you can download a copy of the presentation this morning from the ASX platform. For now, though, I'll hand it over to Tim. So, Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Welcome all to the Tres Estradas update. A lot's happened over the past almost 2 years since I joined the company, and I'd like to run through the sort of the past activities, moving into the next steps to take the project into the first phase of production. First of all, just a quick introduction to our team in Brazil. All of our key people have greater than 20 years experience in the mining sector. We're lucky enough to have retained Diego and Alfredo. Diego's a civil engineer, has been with Aguia in a consulting role for nigh on 10 years. Has experience throughout Brazil and was the lead person in achieving the environmental and installation licenses, and is leading the process for the operational license and the development of the Tres Estradas mine, and also overseeing with his skill team the implementation of the upgrades to suit our phosphate ore in the processing plant at Caçapava do Sul. And Alfredo Nunes is a very experienced geologist who worked and discovered the Tres Estradas site nigh on 11, 12 years ago. He did leave Aguia for some time around the pandemic and joined Fortescue Metals as their country manager, and has returned 12 months ago to assist our endeavours to put the mine into production, and also exploration efforts in the surrounding areas, principally the Passo Feia tenements, which we've drilled over 2,000 metres in the past 12 months using a simple auger machine, which we're aiming to have some JORC results in the second quarter to mid-year next year, which would be tie back into the existing plant at Caçapava, and it's located 12 kilometres from there. So the timeline we've undertaken, once we overcame the public ministry injunction over the Tres Estradas mine site, we had a successful outcome in September of last year. We entered into a rigorous tender process for mine services and logistics contract to take the ore to the processing plant approximately 100 kilometres away. We did a thorough study looking at owner-operated mining and logistics using new equipment, and having a services contract where we transfer a majority of the capex for the mine site into an OPEX, and also reduce our risk of transportation of the 110 kilometres. We felt was the best strategy. We're paying a per tonnage rate delivered to the processing plant, and the mining services contractor is responsible for road maintenance on a municipal road, which is in poor condition, and also ensuring that the grade and everything is delivered to the site is quality, and there is a guarantee in place to ensure they deliver a minimum of 8,000 tonnes per month. Following that, we got organised to the final phase of the regulatory process to get the mine up and running, which is the operational licence. We contracted ABG Engenharia, a Brazilian group, to finalise the environmental monitoring, water monitoring, air sampling, which commenced in October. We signed the contract in September, and the work commenced in October of this year. And shortly thereafter, the mining services contractor started the initial site works as per the installation license in preparation for the operational license. As you can see here, this is a recent photo taken last week of the Tres Estradas mine site. We have all the access and access roads complete. We have the area defined, the waste pile defined. We hope to have the waste and the sump ready in the next 2 weeks, and the site offices, toilets, lunchroom installed as well over the next 2 to 3 weeks. This is all included in the per tonnage rate delivered to the site. We have a minimal capital expenditure in this moment. Just the current timeline, we hope to submit the fee pan license and demobilise the pre-operational phase next month in December. The documentation to be submitted to FEPAN, the state environmental body, and we're expecting a 60 to 90-day turnaround. We are in Brazil, so we have a little thing called Carnival, which can delay things a little, but we've factored that in for a March approval. And then in April of next year, we anticipate the initial transport of ore to the Caçapava plant for processing. So moving across to the DB plant, as a management team, we decided the best approach was to area for existing facilities. For those who are not aware, the Caçapava region and Lavros has a long history of mining. Caçapava has a large limestone industry where they produce about 4 million tonnes of limestone a year for farming and construction uses. There is a significant amount of existing infrastructure. We studied several different possibilities, and we landed on the Dagoberto Barcelos fertilizing blending facility in Caçapava do Sul. It's an 8-year-old facility. The company Dagoberto Barcelos is a family-owned company, has a 100-year history, and is the largest limestone seller into the agricultural sector in Rio Grande do Sul, the state where we work. So once we completed our due diligence, we signed a 10-year plus 10-year option on the fertilizer plant to produce our phosphate. There was a 6-month transition period whereby Dagoberto Barcelos had to refurbish the plant to as new, construct road access from a separate road access to the plant, and ring fence and enable us to lease the property. We completed that. They completed that work in September, October of this year, whereby it was handed to Aguia. And the road access we had some slight delays due to rain, but that has now been complete. Ready for our possession. For some brief photos of before and after we took over the plant and the refurbishment. So as you can see, it was cleaned significantly and painted where necessary. Here are the rolls and bearings of the equipment and the cyclone separator. Following this, we have the conveyor system, which is now painted in safety colours as per Brazilian regulation. And here is the existing steel infrastructure shed that we plan to expand over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And here is the site works, looking from the road to the plant. If you look at the bottom right-hand side picture, this was all part of the transition costs, and which has now been complete and part of the rental of the property. So on November 4th, or August of this year, we had 6 million reais, or just under shy of 2 million Australian dollars, approved by the Brazilian Development Bank of the Far South. That money was received November the 4th into our account, and we're able to allocate the balance of capex required at the DB plant to handle our phosphate ore. The initial funds are for civil works and the electrical connection. We need to construct a new electrical connection for our site and not from the existing limestone plant just behind our site. Also civil works for the weighbridge, and obviously to support our site offices, our lab and our toilets and our truck waiting area, etc. And for the run-of-mine stock shed, for when we deliver from the mine, we need to increase that to suit our production capabilities. Following that, we will install the site offices, the scale, and complete the RM stock shed in January. And our equipment required to change the processing of the plant, we require a hammer mill, a lung silo, 2 additional conveyor belts, a bucket filter, plus a front-end loader and a telescopic loader will be delivered in the month of February, early March, in parallel with the readiness of the Tres Estradas mine site. So the ramp up for the project in 2026, we basically will run a single shift in the first 2 months and produce 4,000 tonnes, process 4,000 tonnes loaded into 1-tonne bags in the first 2 months, that's into May or June, ramping that up to 2 shifts and taking up production up to 8,000. Bearing in mind, this is a new ore type in this plant, so we're keeping our numbers, production numbers, conservative. And then going into the September, October, we have the 3 shifts, so 24 hours a day, and until the balance of the year. The capacity of the plant, the bottleneck is the dryer and the elevator to the dryer, but we feel that our stats show that we can get 24 tonnes an hour. So initial expectations of 100,000 tonne a year with the existing facility is underestimated. We feel we can overachieve that going into 2027. So just a little bit, I'm not sure the level of knowledge of Brazil and where we sit, but basically we're about 90, the mine site is 90 kilometers from the border of Uruguay. In the sort of the processing plant's about 150 kilometers from the border with Uruguay in the south of Brazil. We're at top end, Argentinians and Uruguayans and the south, the Gaúchos, supposedly create the best beef in the world. Also large soybean production, rice production to the east towards the city of Porto Alegre, and you have corn and various other commodities. But it's a very long-standing agricultural sector, and really the creation of the agricultural sector in Brazil from over the past 200 to 300 years since. So I'll just pass on to the next slide. So basically, we've defined, we have 3 different groups of people we can sell to. The first is the farming cooperatives, significant players, obviously, in the south of Brazil. As you can see here, you have an annual revenue in Brazilian currency, which is about 3.5, 1 Aussie dollar buys 3.5 Brazilian reais, is over 12 billion reais revenue a year between the cooperatives. Quatro Sul is our neighbouring cooperative, and they have 2,500 members, and Quatro Sul as well has 7,000 farmers that they support. So these are very important, and we anticipate that at a 300,000 tonne a year production, they will be responsible for 50% of our sales. Following, we have sort of 2 further groups, which is resellers and wholesalers of agricultural products, fertilizers, machinery, etc. We anticipate that we can get up to 20,000 tonne a year. 3 or 4 of these groups offer machinery to place the material, and get market to our product when they sell, including the placement over the field, which is an interesting strategy, and they're quite successful. And we've also moved into Uruguay. We have signed one MOU or LOI for sales into Uruguay, and we're currently negotiating a second soft sales agreement. We are not able to have a firm sales agreement at this point in time because we need all the machinery to be installed and equipment installed in the plant to obtain the sales license from the agriculture, which we anticipate to obtain in February once they have a site inspection, once we've installed the hammer mill and the silos and the run-of-mine stock sheds complete and the weighbridge, etc. So there's also 150 small producers that we hope to, at least attract interest from as well, from soybean, corn, rice, etc. As we stand today, we've signed up 54,000 tons of sales for next year. We've actually discovered in the past six or so weeks is that organic compost producers. We're in discussions with 3 or 4 of them, predominantly surrounding the greater city of Porto Alegre. And basically we are running tests with phosphate in the compost process of 100 days as the compost ferments, etc. And we have 2 companies who have already expressed interest in signing 10,000 tons. I mentioned here Folieto and AGPTE, which is the Association of Organic Orange, Lime and Mandarin Producers. And a lot of the other interest is from the sellers trying to get their hands on the product before the big cooperatives going through their testing phases of the product at the moment. Sorry. This is just basically a little bit of upside. This is an exploration prospect located 12 kilometres from the plant. We've drilled basically about 1,700 metres of shallow wells into this saprolite tenement in Caçapava do Sul. The XRF results are coming in very similar to that of Tressus stratus. However, we're still waiting on the results shortly, and our idea is to have this as a resource and certified under JORC moving into the second quarter mid next year. But the XRF potential is very exciting. And that's the end of the presentation. I welcome any further questions.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So we've had some questions come in from the floor. Just keeping in mind, obviously, Tim's the in-country manager for the Brazil, will be associated only on the phosphate portfolio. But Tim, with the first question, just in connection with the planned production ramp up that you mentioned and the sales outlook, can you talk about an indication just based on that demand outlook and the current high international phosphate prices, how that's expecting to flow through to revenue and profits for the group? Just a sort of high level overview.
Well, we've been marketing the product. We have 2 very experienced sales people have been marketing for the past 6 weeks since they had the affair in Porto Alegre, similar to the Royal Melbourne or Royal Sydney shows. And the demand, as our production forecast, will probably beat the 60,000 tonnes next year, but in our planning, we're aiming for 60,000 tonnes of produced phosphate, and we've already met the 56,000 tonnes signed, and we are negotiating some further MOUs as well. So demand has been quite high. Our pricing as mentioned in previous documents, our base price is about 200 Aussie a tonne, equivalent in Brazilian currency, obviously. And the Uruguayan MOU will be in US dollars, however, based on that similar pricing. It is FOB at the plant, and based on demand and in Brazil for the exportation of commodities such as soy, etc., we feel there's a great need for phosphate in Rio Grande do Sul. 100% of phosphate and phosphate-based fertilizers are imported from Morocco, Peru. There are some people importing it from the north of Brazil, but the logistical cost, because of trucking, is very high. So we're in a very unique position compared to the international phosphate price in the local region and in high demand. I guess the interesting part is that the compost producers sell to organic producers, and our product is the only organic product available in the southeast of Brazil, which we have yet to exploit, to be honest with all the other organic farmers, particularly in countries like Paraguay, where they focus on organic sugars, because Brazil's sugar is more focused on biofuels, etc. So it's not organic. So we're looking at those markets as well going to next year.
Yeah, interesting. Just thanks, Tim. Just sort of staying on this demand outlook, you talked through the large cooperatives in Brazil, and then the additional market for wholesalers and resellers. You mentioned the initial production, as production ramps up next year, starting with 4,000 tonnes, then to 8,000, and the 10,000 across the 3 shifts. Will that sales breakdown largely based on those MOUs largely be in connection with those cooperatives? And are you competing with the wholesalers and resellers in selling to the cooperatives?
No, they'll be separate sales. So the cooperatives, the cooperatives will have their own farming syndicates, I guess, and they sell directly to those people. The wholesalers act as independent sellers, and they have their established clients. Usually, they'll be a smaller to medium-sized farmer, whereas the cooperatives will sell to the medium to larger sized farmers. And the cooperatives have they have full-time agronomists, multiple agronomists working for them. They'll be testing our product on their growing areas, and whereas the wholesalers are selling to a smaller group, so they'll be relying on Aguia's independent testing results we currently have, and we have been testing the product since 2019 in 6 different regions of the state of Rio Grande do Sul.
Yeah, well noted. Thanks for that. Perhaps turning to the regulatory outlook for a moment. One question came through. Have there been any recent policy developments, to your knowledge, at the Brazil federal government level that might impact positively or negatively for the phosphate market in Brazil going forward?
Yes, they have. Both the federal government and actually Diego and I attended the state government trying to create locally made fertilizer incentives. So in Porto Alegre 10 days ago, which is the capital of Rio Grande do Sul, they had a public audience, which is a formal process involving the members of the federal Ministry of Agriculture and state politicians and federal politicians. This same movement is happening in Brasilia as well, led by even President Lula has been participating in fertilizer events, even with companies such as Petrobras, trying to promote locally made fertilizers and lessen dependence on the imported product. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, Rio Grande do Sul imports 100% of its fertilizer needs and phosphate needs, and Brazil as a country imports 85% of its needs. So, for example, last year Brazil imported $16 billion worth of fertilizer, not phosphate, but fertilizer, and Mexico is the next Latin country. They imported $1.9 billion worth of fertilizer. So, as you can see, the need for domestic product is significant. You could even state that it's a security risk for the country if we're not able to access fertilizers and phosphates, and that's why our product is unique.
Well noted. Thank you, Tim. Perhaps turning more near term and just staying with this regulatory outlook. Obviously, project development and the next key catalyst will be that planned license approval and site review scheduled for February 2026. Just a broad overview, this sort of amalgamation of a few questions from the floor. But are there any sort of near-term risks that you see, final risks, or in the process of working up to obtaining that operating license, just with what investors will be monitoring over that next sort of 3-4 month period?
Well, in Brazil, there's the summer holiday risk, so that's an issue. Like anywhere in the world, if you're in the summer period, things tend to slow down a little bit. So there is that risk. And in Brazil, it's a famous saying in Brazil, nothing happens until after Carnival. So we have that. However, we have the public ministry issue that was resolved in September of last year. That was an issue not only against Aguia, it was an issue against the State Environmental Department, FEPAN, questioning the quality of their work. So there is an interest to ensure that from all parties that this process flows smoothly. There has been a lot of dialogue with the public ministry, including the fertilizer conference that we attended in Porto Alegre around 10 days ago. The public ministry participated in that as it was a public audience. So I think the risks is being delayed a month or two is because, as I mentioned, the summer holidays here in Brazil. And also, I'm not sure people are aware, but a year ago we had terrible floods in Brazil. We've just had a cyclone last week with a significant amount of rain, and there is a high amount of rainfall generally, but we have encountered some issues around weather, so that could also maybe add a month or two. But I would say those two items is a low probability, but there is still a risk.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, I think there's sort of covered off on the commercial outlook and the near-term regulatory environment. Perhaps just to round out the Q&A, obviously you touched on these points in the presentation, but maybe it's just worth going over what are the key catalysts over this next 6-month period when you get to the middle of 2026, looking at having product in market, generating revenue. Is there just a high-level overview you can give investors for what to be looking out for now as you execute towards commercialization?
Yeah, I think we have a low-risk CapEx upgrade on the plant. The mine will be prepared, ready for the auditing process for the environmental license in 2 weeks. And so the first catalyst is obviously the operational license and delivering the ore to the plant. Followed by that is increasing production as we discussed, the ramp up. And also I think one of the issues that we have in the economics, and whilst the economics are very robust, we are paying a high trucking fee from it's 110 kilometers of trucking versus having a plant on site. So we would hope that our exploration expectations come to the fore in the middle of next year, whereby we can have a strong JORC resource at those tenements close by to the leased processing facility, which would enable us to go into feasibility studies looking at producing the Pasofea deposit into the Dagoberto's plant and building a standalone plant at the Tres Estradas mine, combining, in 2028, 2029, where we'd have 2 plants up and running, potentially up to 600,000 tonnes annually. We've done the feasibility studies on the lease property at the moment to increase to 300,000 tonnes per annum, which is the addition of an additional dryer, obviously, and the crushing ability and the internal transport process to do that. It's a fairly simple process with we're looking at $3.5 million additional capex for that upgrade. So our goal is, subject our exploration expectations and to looking at doubling our production for them into two different locations and reducing our operating costs due to improved logistics.
Yeah, that's a really interesting recap, and just the feasibility component of that study, you'll be sort of looking to generate revenues from those existing operations, which will contribute to the sort of scaled growth to bring all production sort of more vertically integrated.
Yes. So again, subject confirming our exploration activities, and hopefully in the middle of next year, then we would go into feasibility studies to look at standalone project at Tres Estradas, using the ore from Tres Estradas and taking the exploration area into the existing leased facility, which is only 11 kilometres away versus 110. So
brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, I think that's that sort of gives a timeline for investors to be looking out for, particularly through to the middle of next year. So appreciate the overview and for taking the time to answer those questions. It's a really useful update for investors on the company with where the phosphate assets are up to. Thanks also, as usual, there to our attendees and those who submitted questions for the live Q&A and also ahead of time in writing. As mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be available on Aguia's website, media platforms later today, and a copy of the presentation has been lodged on the ASX platform. Tim, just before we go, are there any final comments that you'd like to add here?
No, I think it's a fantastic project that's been in the working since 2012, and unfortunately the previous management team suffered a hiccup with something that you would say is out of their control, which is not good. But now we've overcome that hurdle, and we have a lot of support here in Brazil for the project to succeed due to dependence from imported fertilizer and phosphate products. So I think we're very close to bringing this to market. And I hope the shareholders feel the same excitement as the people on the ground here in Rio Grande do Sul and even up out there in Brazil. Yes. I think it's an exciting
nice one, Tim. It's certainly interesting value-add proposition for Aguia. So look, that wraps things up for today. Thanks again to Tim and our attendees online, and we'll catch you next time.